In summary, to compare and contrast PCT psychodynamic, we can begin with the purpose of therapy in general is to potentially help clients to go from maladaptive to adaptive states and ease psychological distress and pain. Let's explore, in summary, the psychodynamic and humanistic model. So the psychodynamic model and humanistic model. You can make a case for both of these models are broadly phenomenological in nature. And that means that they hold that consciousness reveals personality. Although Carl Rogers was interested in looking inside consciousness for understanding through introspection, the research would suggest that Freud did not believe that introspection was possible because the mind was made up of competing structures which could block memories and hide information and use protective mechanisms. The unconscious mind refers to any mental process of which you are unaware. The idea of the unconscious mind meant that everything from repressed feelings to automatic reaction habits play a role in your behavior. The humanistic theory of Carl Rogers, however, suggests that personality and behavior are affected by a person's notion of the self-concept. So, for example, you act in a manner which complements the way in which you perceive your ideal self. When discussing theories of behavior, there will always be limitations because the quantity of sample size, demographic, the potential not to reflect the population, and also confirmation bias. Rogers explores at an unconscious level, people are good in nature. So, for example, people are born good, according to Rogers. People were born good, and it's almost, to use an analogy, unlocking the good with a key. And another example would be if you look at humanistic psychologist Maslow, the stage theory of actualization. Under the right conditions, people could actualize. So the PC approach posits that all a therapist needs to do to enable therapeutic movement in the client is to display the three core conditions: empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. The PC approach, the therapist is non-directive and the client takes lead of the sessions. PC posits that people are born good and worthy of the unconditional positive regard, but the experience as an individual has growing up can change the way they see themselves and others. Freud's methods of psychoanalysis, Freud draws attention to the battle between our conscience and desires. Freud discusses his view of unconscious and link to conscience. Freud's ideologies of the unconscious residual, basically a garbage dump for thoughts, emotions. For example, he made generalizations about a child's relationship with his or her parents and the influence they would have on behavior. There was a lot of criticism of Freud's views, implying that they can't be classed as scientific, but you could also make the same case in point for Rogers too. So Freud believed that the majority of what we experience in our lives, the underlying emotions, beliefs, feelings, impulses, are not available to us at a conscious level. Freud defined three elements of personality that we've previously discussed in lectures that underlie and create complex behaviors: the id, the ego, and the superego. It's apparent that the psychodynamic and PCT approach have different ways of treating clients and patients of the same and different problems. We see PCT being more of a conscious mind, the current issues and problems that the client might have. PCT has a positive perception of nature of human beings and perceive the person as not essentially being an outcome of their past experience, but recognize that they are capable of determining their individual futures. PCT tries to improve the adaptive response of clients by way of a collaborative therapeutic relationship, which allows and enhances a positive adaptation. Whilst in psychodynamic, the past, there's a heavy emphasis in the past, the PCT approach focuses on the conscious mind and what we're doing in the here and now, whereas psychodynamic approach focuses on the subconscious and looks to early childhood to examine unresolved conflicts. PCT, the main differences relationship between clients and therapists, the role of the counselor as well, the therapist, the client leads the session, so to speak. So person-centered therapy, the relationship between the therapist and client is critical because it is on the client. They are the primary focus. So psychodynamic therapy has this emphasis on past history and relationships. Psychodynamic therapy focuses on the past emotions and the unconscious mind. Psychodynamic therapy aims to help the client or patient by exploring what happened in past history. Psychodynamic therapy does have a particular focus on the emotions of the client or the patient, whereas the therapist is the expert. In PCT, the client is considered the expert on themselves. The client is the one guiding the experiences, where the therapist responds on what the client is saying and paraphrases, for example, or responds. And in PCT, the client does not, or the therapist does not judge the client in any way, shape, or form. So the PCT approach, the PCT approach, the client or the patient is the expert themselves and finds his or her own way. And there's a focus, as we discussed earlier in PCT, on the conscious mind and what's going on in the here and now, whereas psychodynamic approaches focus on the subconscious mind and looks to early childhood to resolve and examine unresolved conflicts. You can make a case that both PCT and psychodynamic, in practice, the therapeutic actions and attitudes aim to facilitate insight and provide new experience. You could make a case in point that in PCT and psychodynamic that there's a reevaluation and insight gained by the client or the patient exploring the issues and engaging with the therapist. And that may begin to change in previously held experiences of self-identity, the process of the consciousness and the manner of relating to self and others. So we know from previous lectures that the psychodynamic theory and the therapist is the expert, and they're using their knowledge and skill. They interpret the experiences of the client, behavior, for example, dreams, to unveil the unconscious motives, giving an opportunity to be free of those unconscious controls. And as we've spoken in previous lectures, that was primarily focused around the id, the ego and superego, dealing with the person's psych, emotions, feelings, thoughts. On the basis our true motives are unconscious and hidden from us because the instincts and urges or may not be seen to be a social norm. So in the psychodynamic approach, there's an exploration, a possible exploration how people develop an early model of relationships, which pretty much forms a foundation for future relationships. Whereas in PCT, the approach might explore the concept of conditions of worth and how this affects the development of the self-concept and the loss of contact with the organismic self. In summary, I guess many people would like to believe in the humanistic free will. We can all change and grow in adverse to a more deterministic and psychoanalytical limitation, with Freud focusing more on the individual than people collectively, Rogers focusing on the conscience and Freud the conscience. Though all things said and done, you could strongly suggest based on the research that personality is multifactorial.